It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The sun was shining over a quiet southern town, the church bells were ringing, and every guest had taken their seat. The groom stood nervously at the altar, the violinist played softly, and the bride was moments away from walking down the aisle. But then, everything stopped. A filthy, limping stray dog wandered into the church. His fur was matted, his ribs were showing, and one eye was nearly shut. He looked lost, broken, and completely out of place in that perfectly decorated wedding. Some guests gasped. Others whispered. The groom frowned, confused. But the bride? She froze at the doorway. Her bouquet fell to the ground. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the dog, and then, without a word, she ran straight toward him, collapsing to her knees in her white dress, crying like a child. Because that wasn't just a stray dog. That was Charlie. And he wasn't supposed to be alive. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. A quiet southern town with wide porches, tall oak trees, and front yards filled with rocking chairs and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Summers were hot, the tea was sweet, and everyone knew each other's name. So when Claire Whitmore, the mayor's daughter, announced her wedding, it became the event of the season. People talked about it in diners, at the grocery store, and even during Sunday service. The church was being decorated for weeks. Every flower was in its place. Everything had to be perfect. And it was. At least, on the surface. What no one saw, what no one cared to notice, was the skinny dog that had been wandering near the church for days. He never barked, never begged. Just limped quietly through alleyways, resting under cars, drinking from puddles, and sleeping near the church steps at night. Some thought he looked familiar. Others dismissed him as just another stray. But he wasn't just another dog. He had once belonged to someone. He had once had a name. That name was Charlie. And Charlie had once been Claire's world. But that was 2 years ago, before he vanished without a trace. Back then, Claire had cried herself to sleep for weeks. She printed flyers, knocked on doors, offered rewards. But eventually, everyone, including her parents, told her it was time to let go. So she did. Or at least, she pretended to. And now, 2 years later, as she stood in her wedding dress behind the grand oak doors of Willow Creek Church, she had no idea that Charlie was only a few feet away, watching, waiting, barely alive. And the moment those doors opened, everything would change. The grand oak doors of Willow Creek Church creaked open, and the soft swell of the violin filled the air. Every head turned. The guests stood. Phones were raised. Whispers quieted. Claire took a deep breath. She looked stunning in her lace dress, her blonde hair curled just right, her smile carefully rehearsed. Her father stood beside her, proud and misty-eyed. He reached out his arm for her to take. But then it happened. A soft bark. Then another. Heads turned, not toward Claire, but toward the altar. Down the aisle, limping on 3 legs, came the dog. Dirty. Ragged. His fur once golden but now brown with dust. His tongue hung from his mouth as he panted, exhausted from the heat. His tail wagged once, weakly. Gasps filled the room. Someone muttered, "What in the world?" A woman near the front clutched her pearls. And Claire. She dropped her bouquet. Her lips trembled. That walk down the aisle she had dreamed of since childhood, gone in an instant. All she could see was the dog. That face. Those sad, tired eyes. The scar above his right eyebrow. No, it couldn't be. But then he looked at her. Really looked at her. And whimpered. Her knees buckled. She took a single step forward, then another. Her father tried to steady her, confused. Claire. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She ran. Barefoot, lifting her dress, tears already falling before she reached him. "Charlie," she whispered, collapsing to the ground. The dog stopped. Tilted his head. Then in a final burst of strength, he rushed into her arms, tail wagging like he hadn't forgotten a single day. The church went silent. There, on the aisle where she was supposed to marry someone else, Claire held the dog she thought she had lost forever, crying harder than she ever had in her life. And the groom? He just stood there. Frozen. Watching. Because he knew exactly who that dog was. And exactly what he meant. The moment Claire felt Charlie's fur under her hands, something inside her cracked open. It didn't matter that her makeup was ruined, or that the guests were staring, or that she was supposed to be walking down the aisle. None of that mattered. She pressed her forehead against his and whispered his name over and over again. "Charlie. Charlie. Charlie." The dog licked her tears. His tail thumped the floor. For a moment, they were both children again, like the day she found him as a puppy behind her family's barn. He was barely breathing, covered in fleas, with a broken paw. She had begged her father to let her keep him. And after weeks of vet visits, warm baths, and sneaking him into her bed, Charlie became more than a pet. He became her shadow. Her secret keeper. Her best friend in a world that didn't always understand her. And then, 2 years ago, he disappeared. She had let him out into the backyard just like every other morning. 10 minutes later, the gate was open. The food untouched. The yard empty. The police said it was probably coyotes. Her father blamed the old fence. Her friends said it was just a dog. But Claire never believed that. She searched every street. Posted flyers on every pole. Slept with the porch light on. Kept his food bowl filled for weeks, just in case he came back. He never did. At least, not until now. Now, here he was, his ribs visible through his fur, a new scar across his muzzle, but unmistakably him. She cupped his face in her hands and looked him in the eyes. "Where did you go?" she whispered. Charlie licked her palm. Behind her, the room remained still. The music had stopped. The guests didn't know whether to sit down, leave, or just keep filming. And the groom? He hadn't moved. But his jaw was clenched. Because Claire wasn't the only one who remembered Charlie. And he wasn't the only one hiding a secret. Claire didn't notice the murmurs behind her. She didn't care that her dress was dragging across the floor or that her knees were stained from the church tiles. All that mattered was Charlie, trembling in her arms, like a lost child finally home. But someone else noticed everything. Ethan, the groom, stood frozen at the altar. His hands curled into fists. His jaw tightened. The same Charlie he used to call, just a mutt, was now the center of everything. Claire hadn't looked at him once since the dog arrived. He forced a smile. One that didn't quite reach his eyes. From the corner of the church, Mrs. Langley, Claire's childhood neighbor, whispered to her husband. "Isn't that the dog she lost? The golden one she cried about for months?" "Looks like it," her husband muttered. "But where's he been all this time?" That question hung in the air. Charlie leaned into Claire's chest, exhausted. His body had grown thinner. His paws were rough and cracked. Yet there was still a softness in his eyes, like he had been waiting for this moment too. Claire slowly stood up, cradling Charlie as best as she could. She turned toward the crowd, her voice shaking. "He's mine. This is Charlie." There were gasps. A few scattered claps. One woman even dabbed her eyes with a tissue. But Ethan didn't move. Claire looked at him for the first time. "I have to get him water," she said quietly, as if asking permission. He nodded once. "Sure." But inside, something dark stirred. Because Ethan had a secret. And Charlie, this stray, broken, miracle of a dog, might have just brought it all back to life. Claire stepped out of the church, Charlie pressed gently against her chest. The sun hit her face, hot and blinding, and for a moment she forgot she was wearing a wedding dress. Forgot about the guests, the ceremony, the man she was supposed to marry. She crossed the small garden beside the chapel and knelt by the outdoor faucet near the side of the building. It was rusty, but she turned it on anyway. Water poured into her cupped hands as Charlie waited patiently, tongue out, eyes tired. He drank like he hadn't touched clean water in days. "Easy, boy," she whispered, brushing his fur. It was tangled and dirty, but familiar beneath it all. Inside, the guests murmured, unsure whether to stay seated or leave. A few had already stepped outside for air. One of Claire's bridesmaids, Jenna, followed her quietly to the garden. "Claire," she said softly, "do you want me to call the vet? Or maybe your dad?" "No," Claire cut in, eyes still locked on Charlie. "Not yet." Jenna hesitated. "He really came back, didn't he?" Claire nodded, but her heart wasn't still. There were too many questions circling her mind. Why had Charlie shown up here, of all places? Today? Why did he look at her like he'd been through hell? And why hadn't she noticed until now, the way Ethan looked at him? Something about his reaction wasn't right. Ethan always rolled his eyes at Charlie back then. "He sheds too much," he used to say. "You spoil that mutt." He'd laughed when Claire cried over the flyers. Said it was just a dog. But when Ethan saw Charlie today, he didn't look surprised. He looked nervous. Claire glanced back at the church doors, now slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Ethan speaking with her father, gesturing sharply. And in that moment, something inside her whispered. Charlie didn't just come back. He came back for a reason. Claire sat on the bench beside the chapel with Charlie curled at her feet. The garden was quiet, except for the hum of cicadas and the distant music still playing faintly inside the church, forgotten. Her hands trembled slightly as she scratched behind Charlie's ear, his favorite spot. He leaned into her, his tail thumping weakly. But as she moved her fingers across his neck, she felt something strange. A thin, raised line beneath the fur. A scar. Not an old one. She pulled the fur back gently, careful not to hurt him. There it was, a long, clean scar running just under his collar line, like a cut made by something sharp. Surgical even. "Charlie, what happened to you?" she whispered. He just blinked slowly and rested his head on her foot. Behind her, the church doors creaked again. Claire turned to see her father stepping out, his tie loosened, his face flushed with confusion. "Claire," he said, his voice low. "What's going on? People are waiting. Ethan's asking if we should postpone." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked up at him and asked, "Did you know Charlie had a scar?" Her father frowned. "What?" She stood slowly. "A fresh one. And he looks like he hasn't eaten properly in weeks." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Stray life is hard, I guess." But Claire saw it, the flicker in his eyes. She stepped closer. "Did Ethan ever tell you what he really thought happened to Charlie?" Her father looked uncomfortable. "Sweetheart, that was 2 years ago. We all thought he ran off. There's no need to bring that up now." "I never believed he ran off," Claire cut in. "And now he shows up on my wedding day." Her father sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe it's just fate. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." But it was too late. Something was bigger. Because when Claire looked down again, she noticed something shiny tangled in Charlie's fur near his collarbone, a tiny metal tag, bent and dirty, barely hanging on. She unclipped it, wiped the dirt, and read the engraving. And her heart dropped. The tag was small, no bigger than a dime, and bent at the edge like it had been crushed under something heavy. Claire turned it in her fingers, squinting to read the faded engraving. Her hands went cold. Property of Ethan Art Mayfield. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down at Charlie, who was now lying still, eyes closed, tail twitching at her touch. The scar. The timing. The tag. None of it made sense. Or maybe it made too much sense. Claire, her father asked, his voice softening. What is it? She held up the tag. Why would this be on Charlie? He stepped forward to look, but the moment his eyes caught the name, his expression changed. Subtle, but real. His lips tightened. He said nothing. You knew, Claire whispered. I didn't, he began. You knew. He sighed heavily. It wasn't like that. Ethan, he was trying to help. Claire's eyes burned. Help? Her father looked down. Charlie kept jumping the fence. Ethan said he knew someone who could train him. Keep him from running. Said it'd only take a few days. She stared at him, horror growing in her chest. You let him take Charlie? Her father nodded, shame in every wrinkle on his face. And then a week passed. Then 2. He told me Charlie got loose. That he ran off during training. I wanted to tell you, Claire, but you were so broken already. I thought if I told you the truth. You lied to me, she said, backing away, voice cracking. Both of you. Her eyes darted to the church. To Ethan. The groom she was supposed to marry. The man who took her dog, and never gave him back. Suddenly, the wedding, the white dress, the flowers, it all felt like a cruel joke. A celebration built on betrayal. Charlie whimpered softly. Claire looked down at him, then back at the open church doors. And with a shaky breath, she whispered. He never ran away. Claire stood outside the church, heart pounding like thunder beneath her ribs. Her white dress now bore dirt and grass stains. Her hands were clenched around the tag, the sharp metal biting into her palm. She turned toward the open doors. And walked back in. The church had grown quieter. Most guests sat in stiff silence, fanning themselves nervously. The violinist had stopped playing long ago. Everyone turned as Claire re-entered, with Charlie limping faithfully behind her. She didn't look at anyone. Not until she reached the altar. Not until she faced Ethan. He looked calm, like someone trying to keep control of a situation slipping from his grip. Claire, he began, with a practiced smile, everyone's worried. Let's go outside, talk for a second. Get you cleaned up, Anne. She held up the tag. His eyes flickered. Just for a second. But she saw it. You told me Charlie ran away, she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Ethan blinked. Claire, please, this isn't the time. You took him. You had him chipped with your name. Trained. Scarred. And when it didn't work, you just let him go. A murmur rippled through the guests. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're being emotional. Claire stepped closer. I begged you to help me look for him. I cried in your arms. And the whole time, you knew. He glanced at her father, then back at Claire. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a dog. Don't say that. Her voice shook with rage. You knew what he meant to me. And you still lied. Charlie, as if sensing her anger, let out a low, tired growl. The sound echoed. Ethan looked down at the dog and scoffed. So what now? You're going to call off our wedding because of a mangy stray? Claire didn't hesitate. She turned to the crowd, lifted her veil off her head, and dropped it on the floor. Then she looked Ethan dead in the eyes. There's no wedding. The church fell into stunned silence. Claire's words echoed louder than the violin ever could. No wedding. Some guests whispered nervously. Others stared, mouths agape. Ethan stood frozen, his face pale, unable to speak. Claire bent down and gently lifted Charlie into her arms, cradling him like the fragile soul he was. His tired eyes met hers, and she smiled, a soft, hopeful smile she hadn't felt in years. "I lost myself when I lost you," she said softly. "But now, maybe I can find who I'm supposed to be." Her father approached cautiously. He reached out and touched her shoulder. "Claire. I'm sorry. I should have told you." She shook her head. "It's not your fault. But I need to be honest with myself now." Outside, the summer sun blazed, but inside, something shifted, a weight lifted from the air. Claire knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. She'd have to rebuild trust, heal old wounds, and face a town full of questions. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. She glanced at the guests, many of whom had stood by her through the years, quietly supporting her grief. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Others nodded, understanding that this was more than just a cancelled wedding, it was a reclaiming of a lost bond. Claire looked down at Charlie, stroking his fur gently. "We'll get you cleaned up, old boy. And then, we start fresh." As she stepped outside, the crowd parted silently, allowing her to pass. A few brave voices offered quiet words of encouragement. Claire breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the summer air fill her lungs. No more secrets. No more lies. Only the promise of a new beginning. And a loyal friend who had never given up on her. Weeks passed since the wedding that never was, but in Willow Creek, Claire and Charlie were becoming inseparable once again. The townsfolk watched as the mayor's daughter and the stray dog she once lost rebuilt their bond in quiet, everyday moments. Claire spent mornings brushing Charlie's matted fur, slowly nursing him back to health. She took him on long walks beneath the towering oaks where they once played as puppy and child. She laughed again, genuine laughter, not the forced smiles she wore before. But more than that, Claire found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The betrayal she felt gave way to forgiveness, not just for Ethan or her father, but for herself. She realized that sometimes the hardest part of love is letting go. And sometimes, it's about finding your way back. One afternoon, as Charlie rested on the porch with his head on Claire's lap, a familiar figure approached down the gravel road. It was Ethan, carrying a small box of apology and regret. "I was wrong," he said quietly, eyes sincere. "About everything." Claire looked down at Charlie, who gave a low bark, then back at Ethan. "This isn't just about a dog," she said. "It's about trust. And some things can't be fixed with words." Ethan nodded. "I understand." But Claire smiled softly. "I'm ready to move forward, without lies." As Ethan walked away, Claire looked back at Charlie, her loyal friend. Together, they had survived loss, pain, and betrayal. But now, in the quiet town of Willow Creek, they were home. Forever.